Over time, arcade cabinets have slowly disappeared from sight. Once the strongest and shiniest machines on the market, their graphical power seemed impossible to replicate at home. Unrivaled by anything, they guzzled and gulped children's pocket money and parents' wages. Yet, the home consoles crept closer, 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 until what you could play on your relaxing couch had become even more impressive than those coin-eating machines. And suddenly, the golden age of the arcade was over and superseded by the ever-growing home console market. Nowadays, most people wouldn't link Nintendo and arcades anymore. They haven't had much interest in working on these for a long time. Funnily enough though, arcade machines weren't just important, but essential for Nintendo's history, not only letting them enter the video game market, but also landing a breakthrough hit that would be incredibly influential. Our story today, my dear viewers and/or listeners, starts 5 decades in the past, in the middle of 1973 to be exact. As I've said, we must start our little history lesson in 73. Nintendo, which could already look back on over 80 years of business endeavors, being founded in 1889 as a playing card company, that's 1 year after the oldest surviving film, Roundhay Garden Scene, was filmed, began experimenting, dabbling in a brand new medium. Video games, with emphasis on video as you're going to learn, and their first step into this new realm was this thing called Laser Clay Shooting System, a light gun shooter. Nintendo had actually been making light gun games prior to this one, when branching out as a toy manufacturer, and as makes sense for a toy manufacturer, those were battery-operated toys. In 1970, the Consensu SP series released, consequently expanded by the Consensu Custom series. They had exclusive guns and targets that were sold separately. Duck Hunt for NES was inspired by a toy version which came out in 1976 and was part of the Consensu line of toys. You might call it a fun fact, and I got another one down my sleeve. The Magnavox Odyssey Light Rifle, an accessory product for the Odyssey console, was manufactured by Nintendo. The Magnavox Odyssey, by the way, was the first commercially available home console ever, and released in 1972, so some time before Nintendo showed any obvious interest in the gaming industry. They really were involved from the very beginning. Enough fun facts for now, we need to get back on track. The idea behind Laser Clay was thought of by Hiroshi Yamauchi, the then company president, after reading a newspaper article about ball trap competitions. They already produced electronic guns, so he asked if their product could be refunctioned for a shooting simulation. The project was approved and labeled the Laser Clay Shooting System, and this system provided something very unique that a toy just couldn't do: non-static targets. The Consensu targets would stand in one place and then you'd shoot at them from afar. The Laser Clay system used an overhead 16mm film projector to project the flying targets onto a 15 by 2.5 meter long canvas. Through reflections, the system calculated if a target was hit and displayed a picture of it destroyed. And as you might have thought, 15 by 2.5 meters is huge. Subsequently, the system was built in deserted bowling alleys. Those had slowly gone bankrupt after the Japanese bowling craze of the 60s was replaced by karaoke, leaving them unused. The system became a financial success, running until 1978, and probably showed Nintendo the possible gains from entering the video game industry. Although it could be argued that the laser clay shooting system was the first game Nintendo ever produced, they themselves omitted, together with Wild Gunman, and consider EVR-Race to be their first actual game release. EVR stands for Electronic Video Recording, a sort of predecessor for the future VHS cassettes. It still isn't what we would call a normal game and dependent on pre-recorded video. And how did it work? Good question, mate. It was a betting simulator. Basically gambling, merely without the chance of winning money. So, gambling without the fun part, I suppose. The way it worked was to randomly select a video reel which either showed horses or cars. Each finishing order had a reel, meaning every constellation could theoretically be picked. The players, up to 6, betted on one of the horses or cars, and the winner won. The game was apparently hard to maintain and broke down regularly. No cabinets have survived and not even Nintendo got one. Sadly, the game is truly lost. The following years aren't overly interesting to us and this video will be long enough even with the exclusion. I'll skip before you can skip. 1978 though is very interesting. It marked the end of video usage and the beginning of the classic games you would expect. No more pre-recorded videos in big reels anymore. Just one last time. A last shot. Test Driver. No, that's Test Drive, completely different. Test Driver was part of the mini laser clay system. Yes, we aren't finished with 16mm. The mini laser clay was, as the name implies, a smaller version of the laser clay system that could be sold in arcade cabinet form. Always needing a bowling alley to build your monstrously huge gaming setup is inconvenient. The mini version solved that issue, and all following games, like the aforementioned Wild Gunman, were developed for it. Test Driver was the last to come out, at the very end. The game's goal was simple: survive for a set time, don't crash. The high scores were saved, a novelty, and the cabinet featured a full-on racing wheel instead of a joystick to immerse you in the driving experience. A short few months ahead of Test Driver was Computer Othello, which is a bit more compelling. It adapts the strategy board game Reversi, also known as Othello, as a minimalistic arcade game. The innovation was that your opponent was an AI, which wasn't an everyday occurrence back then. Because of that technical feat, the game garnered a lot of prominence. And being a table and all, the Computer Othello found success even outside arcades, in cafes for example. Besides Othello, Nintendo released Block Fever later that year, a breakout ripoff. Nintendo had no real exclusive titles of their own, so they fell back on what was already working. I solely mentioned Block Fever because it and Othello both released for the Color TV game, the first video game system Nintendo ever made. The Color TV game was part of the first console generation, hand in hand with the Magnavox Odyssey. Not 3 sentences back I casually stated that Nintendo had no exclusive titles. Man, 1981 rewrote this sentence to Nintendo has an incredibly successful, impactful and mustacheful game in their pocket. I'm surely right if I reckon you heard of Donkey Kong before. Who hasn't? There might not be a better remembered game from the early 80s except for the Hungry Yellow Circle. Rivaling Pac-Man was actually the main reason for its existence. A triumph! It propelled Nintendo's name to stardom, kickstarted the masterful career of Shigeru Miyamoto, and introduced jumping, yes, jumping in games to the world. From here on out, Nintendo released many great arcade games, plunging us into a golden age of arcade gaming. They were never as involved as in the early to mid 80s, creating hit after hit, sequels to Donkey Kong, reversing the formula with Junior having Donkey's son rescue his father from Mario, and 3, which stars a random guy named Stanley. Don't know much about this Stanley, but he's an exterminator and rumors rumor him to be Mario's cousin.
Ooh, yikes! A ball! It's a ball! Oh, wow, it's that pesky fly!
And that Mario, mostly known for being Stanley's cousin, got a game all for himself in '83 called Mario Bros. That also originated Luigi, who's mostly known for being Stanley's other cousin.
Mario, where are you? Mario Brothers, new from Atari.
A different character found his first successes at a similar time, even though he isn't as well known today as the Blumber brothers. Little Mac from Punch-Out! Originally, the main character had no name and was represented by the 3 initials the players chose. Neither in Punch-Out! Nor its sequel Super Punch-Out! Was the wireframe green-haired boxer named. That changed when Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! Came out for the NES, surprisingly the 3rd title in the series. Punch-Out! Hit the scene full force. Genjo Takeda, creator of EVR-Race, directed. Miyamoto designed the characters, giving them their recognizable look and strong personalities, and Koji Kondo, whose debut this was, composed the soundtrack. What a trio! The cabinet has dual screens, one for displaying the HUD, like portraits, time and score, while the other shows the action, how Mac obliterates his competition, if the player on joystick and buttons has skill. Sequels followed suit and solidified Punch-Out's footing as an influential franchise. Nintendo ended its run in the arcade with a Punch-Out spin-off, Arm Wrestling. As I'll detail in the upcoming segment, later games either wouldn't be developed by Nintendo internally or weren't dedicated arcade products. So we can count Arm Wrestling as their final arcade game. Just because they stopped developing specifically for the arcade didn't mean they'd leave it behind. For half a decade, the Versus system reigned supreme. These cabinets were basically Famicom hardware in disguise, and the games slightly or heavier altered versions of their Famicom counterparts. Some even debuted on the Versus system before they released on home console. The focus of the system was cooperative play, the reason for 2 control panels. It did really well in the US, meaning of course the NES was sure to follow. In a way, they tested the waters with those cabinets, tipping their toes into the North American market, making absolutely certain the US would be viable for the Famicom. In 1990 they were discontinued, and Nintendo, now king of the home console space, shifted their attention to the SNES, releasing at the end of the same year. It grew quiet around the arcades. Maybe Nintendo was done with them.
That's fast! F-Zero for the ultimate G-Force, only on the next generation from Nintendo. Now you're racing with power, superpower.
What a dramatic description. Yes, it did grow quiet, but I ain't fooling you, right? The video hasn't reached its end, not by a long shot. For 4 years, no one heard a peep from Nintendo, until 1994 rolled around and Cruisn USA drove full speed into the arcade halls. And who managed to awake Nintendo from their slumber? Irony has it that Sega was the company responsible. Cruisn USA was a collaboration between Midway and Nintendo to compete with Sega's Daytona USA and Namco's Ridge Racer. The game, along with Killer Instinct by Rare, was advertised with the Ultra 64 brand, formerly Project Reality, which would morph into the Nintendo 64. Both would subsequently get N64 ports. Cruisn even established a franchise, counting 6 installments. After Cruisn World from 1996, Nintendo dropped co-producing the games, having no involvement with later titles. The bare number of releases in the 90s only happening because of Midway's involvement really shows how little interest Nintendo had left with arcades. They couldn't be bothered, and it makes sense. The decline of arcade gaming was inevitable. and the decline was felt harshly when the late 90s came and went. By the 5th generation, consoles had evolved to a point that didn't make arcade hardware obsolete but less impressive, and the 6th generation, which started with the Dreamcast, narrowed the graphical differences down to a slim amount. Sega practically advertised the Dreamcast as arcade at home, porting its biggest titles like Daytona, Virtua Fighter and Crazy Taxi to their console. Most of these ports were basically one-to-one. Also, many players just wanted more complex and intricate experiences, something a machine running on coins couldn't do. Especially on PS1, games focused more and more on cinematic storytelling. Once again, Nintendo went to sleep. And once again, isn't this unbelievable, their former greatest competitor did us all a favor. If Nintendo won't do it, Sega will, and so a new F-Zero was created. You all know GX for GameCube, but there was another F-Zero the very same year. F-Zero AX was the arcade companion piece to GX developed for the Triforce system board, which was a cabinet made by the joint forces of Nintendo, Sega and Namco. 1994 had Nintendo published a racing game to rival Daytona and Ridge Racer. 2002 had Nintendo, Sega and Namco working together. From here on out, Nintendo outsourced its brands to third parties, mainly Sega, Namco and longtime partner Capcom. And I want to talk about some of them in depth, starting with
F-Zero AX!
Come on, it's GX, just with a different letter in front of X. The physics and gameplay are almost identical. Keep in mind that the game would have been originally played on one of those cabinets. They had gas and brake pedals, a racing wheel and comfy seat. The input device has a distinct effect on game feel, so playing the way the developers intended would be a special experience, not comparable to using a GameCube controller. And the graphics are pretty much identical too. This is due to the internal Triforce hardware, which is nothing but a slightly steroid-injected GameCube. The cool thing, being based on the GameCube, made it possible to connect both systems. In AX's case, a memory card could be plugged into the cabinet to upload or download data. If it detected GX, it unlocked features in that game, like the AX exclusive characters and circuits. To obtain those now, you either need a cheat or play through the story mode on master difficulty. Knowing how insanely hard GX story mode is, that's quite the accomplishment. AX isn't really lost. All its content can be found in GX, and we are talking about some solid stuff. 10 new characters to choose from and 6 courses ranging from very easy to challenging. If you like F-Zero, you like what AX offers. I'm only disappointed we hadn't had a new F-Zero for almost 2 decades. And 99 doesn't count. What is kinda lost? The Psycraft. I haven't heard of this thing either before researching. Looking spacey and frankly like a ton of fun, the Psycraft was a motion simulator. A trilogy of games made by Sega was released for that spaceship. Club Kart European Session, Initial D version 3 and F-Zero AX Monster Ride. How I would love to play a handful of rounds F-Zero in this. I bet you could fly to Mars and back with it. Man, so cool. Similar to F-Zero, another racing franchise found itself in arcade quickly after. It was only a matter of time for Mario Kart to get the equal treatment. I was honestly surprised it took so long. I am talking about Mario Kart Arcade GP, developed by Namco and launched in 2005. I might as well throw the 2007 sequel GP2 into the same pot. They don't differ overly much, and GP1 is in GP2 almost in its entirety, akin to AX in GX, which makes GP1 sort of unnecessary. Not completely, just nearly. You can view the GP titles as simplified Mario Karts, missing many of the core features you would expect. You can't boost or slipstream. The courses are basic, without shortcuts, you can't even fall off the road, barriers are lined along the edges, and the trick system didn't exist yet. Hey, but you can get a super start if timed right, and jump, which is sometimes implemented into the level design, having you jump over puddles or on higher platforms. Drifting functions completely unlike any other series entry. Here, drifting creates a shield that can block attacks, opposed to charging a drift boost. And speaking of attacks, the GP games have an ungodly number of items. Most are plain copies of each other, so it's not as impressive as on first sight. There isn't the strategy from the mainline titles. You attack either forwards or backwards, slowing down your opponents, and the items are actually divided into forward and backward, and depending on which direction, the item can only be thrown that way. What I found super cool was the choice you had at the last race of a cup. You pick 3 items from the lengthy list yourself and then use them. Unfortunately, they dropped it in GP2, one of a couple things they dropped. We should honestly ignore GP1 from now on and solely focus on its sequel. Regarding content, the game is pretty sizable. 8 cups, 6 returning, 2 new, consisting of 4 races plus a final challenge. The challenges are fun, reminding me of DS's missions. They include everything from shoving a melon down a path to a boss fight against Bowser to end the game. The selection of 13 racers... Oh. Wow, Pac-Man is in this? Namco wanted to include something from their own library, it seems. And to all Mario Pac-Man fans wishing for a collision of these worlds, already happened. On top of that, a Tamagotchi character was added in GP2. What more could you ask for?
Luigi is wiped out by the basin.
I'm sure you heard it while watching my recorded gameplay. A commentator, sports style, has been talking since I switched the gameplay to GP2. I was startled at first, annoyed at second, and felt like I was losing my mind at the third stage.
Donkey Kong is closing in on a rival car. Donkey Kong is gaining on the leaders. Donkey Kong, wow! Donkey Kong takes the shot, missed throw.
You can't shut him up, thankfully. I had quite some fun with both games, and I know using a real cabinet, if I had the chance, would have skyrocketed the fun. As it stands, both are fascinating to check out, especially because most won't have played them. GP2 comes out on top, being a twin with more content. GP1 and 2 can't be distinguished, releasing in a short time span. The same isn't true for the third Mario Kart. When GP2 launched, Wii wasn't even out yet. When Mario Kart Arcade GP DX launched, the titles aren't getting shorter, Wii and 7 were already out. A fact immediately noticeable, we have a massive graphical change-up. The predecessors resemble Double Dash, owing to Triforce. I wouldn't put my life on this, but I think the characters from GP1 and 2 were simply reused Double Dash models, while DX has more in common with 7 running on Namco's in-house ES3. Ignore the slowdown, emulating arcade games is always tricky. It's a blessing we can preserve these games somewhat. Other than the graphical style, a whole lot has been taken from Mario Kart 7. Flying and underwater segments, parts of the character roster. You can clearly see that the current mainline Mario Kart serves as the basis for the corresponding arcade game. Don't get the wrong idea. These games are highly original, their own thing, a fully independent side series. The drifting has been tweaked, now functioning like a middleman between both worlds, the console and arcade realities. You still get a shield to block attacks, however, you also build up a boost meter which can be charged 3 times. So this was the first Mario Kart to include a third boost state. They must have gotten it from 8, which's development overlapped with the X. Or the opposite, who knows. Charging up a full boost is a delight. At the beginning it felt weird, I needed a round or 2 to get the hang of it. It's hard to put a finger on, but I find the atmosphere all these games have immensely endearing. I think it has to do with the tracks, how they are presented. They look like amusement park rides, machinery at every corner, buildings reminding me of stage backdrops, and sometimes cardboard cutouts confronting you, as if they were never meant to feel like real places, rather straight out of Super Nintendo worlds. Even the coins look fake, nothing like the normal shiny golden coins. I wonder what they are good for. You don't lose them by touching other racers anymore. I don't feel faster. Oh, no. Slots. The coins actually unlock a slew of things. New drivers, cards, items. If you collected enough through the races, you can give the Yoshi slot machine a spin and win a random egg. And the cups are structured exactly like before. Each cup is segmented into 4 races, taking place at one location that has 2 distinct routes. Sometimes the environments change time of day, get a new paint job. To my disappointment, the challenge at the end is gone. And I want them back. I miss those absurd challenges. Well, I see the new modes as a replacement. 2-player co-op. Not only the versus system can do co-op gameplay. In the X, if 2 cabinets are linked, a player team can work together and fight the CPUs. A special item exclusive to this mode, called Fusion Kart, can be used to fuse both cards and transform them into a tank. And if you find 2 more players and link 4 cabinets, Team Battle can be played, which lets 2 groups compete against each other.
It came from the 3rd dimension, with its own brain.
Nintendo has experimented a lot with Mario Kart outside arcades, failing occasionally, like with the cancelled Virtual Boy Mario Kart or Mario Motors, a car builder spin-off for DS. They never even saw the light of day, cancelled early in development. Occasionally, we could smack our dollary dues on the counter and buy Nintendo's experiments, like with Mario Kart Live Home Circuit, but Nintendo has also experimented with Mario Kart inside arcades. Ladies and gentlemen, to everyone wishing for ultimate immersion, Mario Kart Arcade GP VR. As the name says, it's a virtual reality game. The Virtual Boy might have crashed and burned to ashes, yet over 20 years later, here we are. I'm almost out of time, so let's get through a bunch of arcade titles I at least want to acknowledge. Rhythm Tengoku, better known as Rhythm Heaven in the West and ported from the original GBA version. Luigi's Mansion Arcade, Capcom was responsible for this one. It's based on Dark Moon, so the player traverses the same environments and fights the same enemies as in the 3DS game, although with a tiny divergence. Luigi's Mansion Arcade is a rail shooter using the gameplay mechanics from the original, flashing your flashlight and vacuuming up the ghosts instead of bursting heads to red or green goo like in House of the Dead. And at long last, Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games Tokyo 2020 Arcade Edition. Man, I take it back. The GP titles were pretty short in comparison. You know the drill with these Olympic Games games. They are minigame collections. Yup. It came out in 2020 and is the very last arcade release from Nintendo. Up until now, it remains to be seen if it really is the very last. Nintendo does take breaks, often for extended periods. We've seen it multiple times. Our journey is at an end, however. A journey through decades upon decades, from the laser clay shooting system, which celebrated its 50th birthday this year, to Mario and Sonic fighting it out, not in a big console war like times past, but an Olympic competition. Nintendo's arcade roots shouldn't be forgotten and spawned one of the most dominant forces in the entire gaming industry. Of course, I couldn't talk about many, the bulk of the releases, else the video would be 4+ hours in length, nor in meticulous detail, so this is nothing but a small insight into a much larger topic. I truly hope some of you, dear viewers that haven't already clicked off distracted by another thumbnail, check these games out if possible. Great teams and individuals are trying their best to preserve those games. The Triforce branch for Dolphin or Technoparrot to name a few. It would be a shame to forget what talented developers have created just because the arcade cabinets are slowly drying up, being resold for thousands and thousands of dollars. Thanks for watching, and thanks for over 200 subscribers.